Now is I think people in general are actually pretty smart. There's like a political switch that gets turned on and off. Were they nice people?
This is tough.
I ask this because like my mom. Okay,
Yes,
so my
everyone
mom
on the outside thinks they're wonderful people.
Well, and at least in my own family and conservatives I've known, it's like you guys are not like they're psychopathic in real life. Like what's going on here?
I agree. Like they are good-hearted people. They care about like their fellow man. Like they want to see people have the best opportunity possible. Blah blah blah. However, they believe that the politicians they're voting for share that value, and that's where the disconnect is. Like it made me think of Ukraine when we're talking about it. Like we can't walk away from someone who is a clear dictator who clearly wants to, recreate USSR, who's moving into, towards Poland. Like he's not going to stop. So I'm Jess Anderson. I am from Virginia, Williamsburg specifically, and I'm running for the House of Delegates out there for the state this November for the 71st District.
You reached out to me. You said you followed some of my content. That's kind of weird. No, I'm just kidding. It's not that weird. There was a nicest lady. Sometimes I have a couple of I'll have people who are very, very old. I've got people who are very, very young that email me. I have like all sorts of different people that watch my stuff, and like people from different walks of life and everything. How did you discover my content, I guess?
So that's a weird turn of events. So I started doing political content and was like following it on TikTok initially. My daughter, who is now almost 21, but was 16 at the time, basically was following a variety of left-wing online YouTubers, and you are one of them, along with some people that you're not really in circles with anymore. But so I basically kind of started listening to a handful of people that she was listening to because she turned me on to them, and just continued to listen to. There's some content of yours that I'm not interested in. I guess some of the foreign stuff, but foreign policy stuff. But like I feel like when it came down to what was happening in Trump's sphere and with his judicial situations, as everything coming down the pipeline, the Supreme Court rulings, all of that, I felt like you did really good due diligence. So I liked hearing what you had to say.
I believe your occupation is a school teacher?
No. So I work in public school, but I work in the front office. I do administration.
Oh, okay. Administration. Yeah. One of the things that is like so frustrating me for Americans right now is I feel like nobody understands the system. And if nobody understands any part of the system, it's really hard to explain why things are so like crazy or weird. Like imagine a European thinks that every American is engaged in active combat warfare every single day. We've all got guns and rifles. And then you have like a European that comes to sit in an American classroom, and a teacher comes in and they've got like 3, AR-15s slung over their shoulders. Like you would look at that immediately as an American and be like, okay, that's really weird. But the European would be like, oh, I don't know, it doesn't seem that weird to me. It seems totally fine. I feel like it's so difficult when I'm explaining or talking about, you talked about the judicial stuff, everything. Did you, have you followed the Eric Adams stuff?
Yes.
Like there is so much unbelievable stuff, but the frustrating thing I have is like, I should be able to say, wow, Trump just ordered his DOJ to rescind just until the next election charges on Eric Adams on a federal indictment. It's a federal indictment. It's like 95% probably good to go. That's crazy. And for the average person, it's like, okay, well, I don't know what Bovee, deputy AG, I don't know what that means. I don't really know what the DOJ does. I thought it was New York State. Aren't those state charges? I don't know what the big deal is for anything. And it's like, okay, Jesus. How do you ever have issues coming, especially because you're running for like a House seat in the local races?
Right.
Do you feel like the average person even knows that those exist on a local level?
No. So I ran in 2023, and I had really good success in 2023, despite losing by a narrow minority. But what I found was I knocked almost over 6,000 doors, had a lot of conversations. And my focus doors were actually lean Republicans and independents and people that had not historically voted consistently. And it's just like what you're saying, like they don't understand all of the nuance of policy. They don't understand the fact that like most people didn't even know who their delegate was. So the woman I'm running against, when I said their name, they're like, I don't know who that is. I'm like, well, she's been your representative for the last 2 terms, and they're like, oh, well, this is the first time I'm hearing of her. They didn't realize that she is a conduit for like dealing with anything at the state level. Like if I'm having problems with DMV or I'm having problems with my Medicaid or I'm having, like that's your contact, and they don't even know that. So there's absolutely a level of, I guess lack of education, civic education around what are different local and official government agencies and leaders do, even those that we're electing. So yeah, it's like you have to teach before you can even introduce yourself as a candidate and be like, well, here's what I'm going to do, and here's what's currently happening. Same thing with her voting record. Like, nobody knew how awful her votes were in the 8 years that she's now been voting. And I bring attention to something, including, people that are on her side of the team, shall we say, in Republican spheres. And they're like, why would she vote against that? I'm like, that's a great question. Maybe you should ask her. And I've kind of pushed people to actually reach out to her and force her to kind of, take ownership of her votes.
It is really crazy that in the United States, we have a system where the states truly do have a ton of independence to exercise so much authority on so many different things, but people are totally unaware of anything that happens in their state at any of the local level. There's an author, Eaton Hirsch, who wrote a book called Politics is for Power. And I thought it was really interesting. There's like 6 stories in the book where you have just like an ordinary citizen who's like, oh, I want to be more involved at the local political level. And at the local level, there is so much power for grab if you're like a dedicated, focused person who wants to participate in local party meetings. And if you can get like 5 or 10 people on your side for these, it's like over. There's so much stuff that you can do. What makes you, why run for the position that you ran instead of anything else? I'm always curious what people's decisions about running for federal versus state office versus whatever, yeah.
So ironically, I did contemplate running against the Congressman Rob Whitman, who's been in the office for like 2 decades, and he's useless. And I think he's going to probably meet his end in 2026. But the reason state was so important to me was I have some pretty key issues that I'm passionate about. Public education, obviously, I've been in the school system for 7 years, and I got a very behind the curtain kind of image of like what's really going on, how underfunded, underappreciated our teachers were, the lack of equity. Like, I live in Williamsburg, which I know you're not familiar with Williamsburg, but by standards,
no, that's in Southern Virginia, right?
Yeah. But like by the standard,
she told me this earlier. I have no idea.
But by the standards of like the Virginia area, it is seen as kind of affluent and very prestigious. That's the word that's really thrown around. And the reality is we have like a massive influx of unhoused, of English learners, and of quite literally people that are living impoverished and like couch surfing and things like that. So there's definitely some disparities. And it's interesting because even the local leadership, like we have a city council in the city, but then adjacent in James City County, which is where I reside, we have a board of supervisors. And they actually have to work together because we have a collaborative school system, which is, it's crazy. We're like a unicorn, but it's also complicated because you've got 3 government entities that are all elected bodies making decisions for one school division. And so there's a lot of misunderstandings and non-representatives, and the funding for that comes from the state. The people that get to make sure that we are still protecting certain students in our schools and making sure that certain curriculums are still making it to the finish line and that we are prioritizing equity among the school system, that is all recognized at our state level. So those are some things I wanted to protect. And another thing is reproductive thing. Obviously, that's been a conversation. This whole like, I'm so over the fact that it's been made kind of a political weapon, because the reality is we've never had a federal government prior to now to really put that into, what's the word, to make it permanent at the federal level, like protect it permanently, codifying. Codifying Roe v. Wade. We've never had the opportunity to do that. And so I hate this argument like Dems had all this time to do it. We've never had an opportunity to do that. Plus, Roe v. Wade wasn't, the whole purpose of Roe v. Wade is to keep the government out of this conversation. So codifying it is almost counterintuitive to what Roe v. Wade even decided to begin with. Yeah,
it's very annoying. There's a graph that gets posted a lot on Twitter. I wish I remember all 4 parts, but it's like the top is like blame Democrats for doing nothing, and then it's like don't vote for Democrats. Democrats don't have majority in any house. Democrats aren't able to pass anything. Blame Democrats for doing nothing, and it's like this cycle. I wish I could figure out the key to this, because Democrats, especially in like I'll say the media spheres that I occupy, are leftist, like socialist communists or whatever. And so these people will have all these grievances and problems, but they don't vote. They don't tell people to vote because they hate the party. And Republicans, okay, God bless them, they think that there are election rigging conspiracies. They think illegals are being brought in to vote. They think the ballot is being rigged all the time, but they still vote. They still go out and vote so much.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Jesus, no matter what you tell them, they're like, we'll go show up and vote. And I'm like, damn, I wish we did that on our side. Backing up to you brought up the education thing, which has been an interest of mine. I think education was the thing that started me on my journey from, I was the most libertarian when my life was the worst. I was a carpet cleaner and I don't know how that works or whatever. And then as I became a streamer and I started to make money and I had to make decisions for my child about where to go to school, these were some of the big things that started to make me realize like, oof, like no offense to my beautiful 4-year-old baby boy, but he didn't do anything to earn going to a good school or anything at all. And the fact that I can just move to an area that has better education than where we live then, that's actually really fucked up. And then, just seeing like teachers shooting out emails in a really wealthy school district, asking us to bring in like supplies for Kleenex or whatever else. And I'm like, damn, this feels kind of weird. Like, I feel like you guys should be compensated more. I feel like it just seems strange that you're having to pay out of pocket for all these things. When you look from the administrative side on education, what do you think are some of the big problems that need to be addressed? I'm guessing destroying the Department of Education is probably not one of those solutions.
Definitely not one of those solutions.
Yeah.
And the problem is and I know you've had these conversations, nobody even knows what the hell the Department of Education does that's so adamant about eliminating it, which is the frustrating part.
Yeah.
Obviously, I live in a district, like I said, my school specifically is so under funded in regards to the poverty level.
Mm-hmm. And can you explain real quick? You said you lived in a unicorn district.
Yes.
This is how the schools work. What's the difference there between other school systems?
So most school systems, if you live in a city, your city has a city council and it has a school board for that city, and the school is localized to that city. If you would live in a county, you have a board of supervisors, and you also have a school board for that board of supervisors that answers to the board of supervisors that oversees that district. Where I'm at, which is called WJCC, it is basically something that was created because in the city of Williamsburg, we have about 1,000 kids total. We have a school division of 11,000 kids. So you do the math. 10,000 of them reside in James City County. It was a way to bring both divisions together, to increase the size, increase the level of resources, and kind of hopefully create this equity that we're dreaming of in school systems. And while it did definitely help, there's still some serious indiscrepancies, like between the city students specifically. So I kind of was mentioning earlier, we're seen as a very prestigious school. And the reality is a lot of people that live there and that are affluent are older. They're not in the school system. Their families are not in the school system. The families that are in the school system live on the outskirts of the city in more of low income hotels, apartment complexes that are almost disconnected from Colonial Williamsburg, which is like the very historic area of this area. And those are the ones actually going to the school.
Okay.
And so when you look on paper of what the school looks like in the city, you're like, holy shit, these people have really low test scores, have the higher propensity for needing free and reduced lunch. They are not performing it and having the same graduation outcomes as their peers. So like you see the discrepancies when you start dwindling down the information based on where people are residing. So I think the intent behind it back when they made this decision, almost 50, 40 years ago now, to combine them was to create a better equity and give more opportunity and spread the kids across the entire area in hopes that it would be pretty balanced.
When you say they combine them, did they also combine like the funding mechanisms as well?
Yes.
Okay, so then theoretically, all the property taxes from all of these areas should go into one pot and then they're distributed.
So that's where it gets a little complicated. So because the city council oversees the city, they contribute basically 10% of their entire tax revenue goes to the school system. James City County, which oversees the other side, which also has a bulk of the students, about 50% of their tax revenue goes to the school system. So it is not equal in the way that the two bodies of government, both in the county and the city, are adding, but it is because of the number of population that's actually attending the school system.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it's very, and it's also tough because it's not the same as just bringing a school board and a board of supervisors to the table or city council to the table to have a conversation. Now you have to bring two local government entities to the table with the school board, which is made up of all of them, to try to make decisions about budgeting. And so that element makes it a little more complicated.
Are these elections, do they tend to be every 2 years or 4 years or?
Every 4 years.
Okay.
And then the school board members, there's two representatives of the school board for the city. They're actually not elected. They're appointed by the existing city council every 4 years.
Gotcha.
But the other 5 are elected. So even that element is,
okay.
It's very interesting.
So then, okay. And then I interrupted you. What do you think are the big problems problems and solutions you think for school districting in your area? like you mentioned education earlier.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we have a massive turnover issue. Funding is a problem. We are nowhere near the standard, let alone above the standard of our neighboring states. And even in my district, we are paying anywhere from 3 to 5% below the state average. So we have a lot of people that live in my area, but travel outside of the district to get a job at another school division because they're going to likely make better money. And vice versa, we have people that live outside of the school district because it's less expensive to live outside of our school district, but work in our district because a lot of people see a school district as prestigious. And it's just interesting to me because, so there's an element obviously of underfunding, and that is both a state and a local issue combined. Like they both need to figure it out. But there's also massive school sizes, and this is a statewide issue. You know, we can have upwards of 25 students in elementary and upwards of 35 in the higher grade levels. Damn. That's a massive, you know, it's always crazy to me when people talk about school vouchers, which my opponent has advocated for. And I'm like, you want to funnel taxpayer money into private institutions that have no standardized testing, no guidelines that they have to follow at the state. They pretty much can do whatever they want. And we're just trusting that they're going to produce intelligent and educated students.
Oh, wait, I did not know that. Do vouchers redirect your tax money as well?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's even worse than I was. I thought voucher just allowed your. Oh no, I guess that makes sense because you can send your kid to private school anyway. A voucher would allow you to transfer. Okay, yeah. Oh.
And what the kicker is most average people that live in a district are going to pay. I actually did the math on this and I was like blown away. Most people are going to pay towards the actual school division, like in my district, $50 to $80 a year in taxes. Yet somehow you've tried to do like some type of mental gymnastics to make it fair that roughly $1,200 tax dollars, or sometimes, you know, sometimes it's $600, $1,200, depending on where you live with these vouchers. You're making it that they're going to get $600 to $1,200 of our tax money to go to that one student. And like, but that one family isn't paying that into the system. So we're really taking the community's money, truly giving it to a singular student to make their decision as a family to go to a school that doesn't have to follow any of the guidelines put forth by the state.
Yeah. And then the side that I usually focus on is that, like, if you have these highly motivated families, I feel like everybody should be bought into our education system.
Yes.
And the idea of, like, I went to private school, God bless, literally, a Catholic private school. So I'm really grateful for the 12 years of education I had. Our public school, the district that we have, I think in Omaha would be West Side. I hope it's West Side because that's where my kid goes, is the really high performing public school district. But the other ones are not as good. But the idea of like pulling like your most motivated families and your best performing students out of the public school system and throwing them to a private school system, I feel like it's bad because, one, you deprive all the other students of being around each other, which would probably be good for all the students. Then two, I feel like there's so much less of an investment then in families that can afford to send their kids to private school or have the ability to in the public schooling system, which is also not good. Because I feel like, especially when I think of kids, so much of my brain got rewired on poverty and wealth in regards to children, because children do nothing to earn it or one way or another. So the idea that you're setting a kid up for success or failure just based on how wealthy the parents are, and that's going to come out in their education, I feel like is a tragedy.
It's crazy.
And then, like you said, another structural thing. Yeah, people will say things like, is it through property taxes that your schools are funded? Okay, yeah. So they'll say things like, oh, my tax money is going to this and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, do you even know what you pay in taxes? It's like, well, you know, my mortgage is, we'll say $1,500 a month. And it's like, okay, how much of that is taxes? They don't know. Some people won't know, like, well, what is my mortgage payment versus my escrow? They won't know what's coming out of the escrow. It's, you know, and then of the escrow, of the taxes, like what percentage is even paid to the school? And then, like you said, yeah, I'm sure there are people who think that, I don't know, I probably pay $1,000 a year for education. It's like, you probably pay like $50, $60, $70 a year towards it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally a fraction of our annual taxes. And what's frustrating to me is, like, I'm okay with this idea of, like, let's look at private schools and see what works for them. Smaller class sizes right off the bat. We know for a fact when you have a smaller class size, you're able to have more of a one-on-one experience with the students and the teachers. Yeah. Obviously resources, having TAs in the classroom, teacher assistants, having, you know, actual technology that's going to benefit and help these students be able to gravitate towards, honestly, a more tech future that we have in this country when it comes to education. And there's a lot of areas in the state of Virginia that are working towards that. We have like GoTech and these different programs and vocational programs that are really geared towards getting students while they're still in middle and high school to be more technically driven and have kind of some motivation to find a career outside of high school. But it's the fact that those aren't equitable, even that. Like, it's just, you know, you have these great programs in place, and like you said, depending on where your zip code is and what you can afford to live is decides whether or not you have it. Great example is my middle daughter is doing a CNA program, certified nurse assistant, and it's through this program that's, you know, great. but it's 50 minutes away. She has to get on a bus every day to go to this program because it's outside of our district. And 36 students applied, and she was only one of 6 that got in because of the fact that we only have this limited number of people because we're spreading across multiple districts that are having access to this program. So it's like those types of things. Like, why are we not creating these programs in every district? Why are we not making sure that every student that wants that opportunity has that opportunity? So that was a big catalyst in me getting pretty political at the local level. Obviously, the political football with abortion, so many states in the Republican states, look at Kentucky, like have literally codified it in their state constitutions because it is a popular, Roe v. Wade was popular. I mean, period. People can argue till they're blue in the face. People want the government out of their medical decisions, particularly up to that point of the 3rd trimester. And when you look at the data, it obviously shows that that's the main time that people are pursuing these types of elective or non-elective abortions. So, that was another thing I wanted to be able to be a part of protecting that at the state level, which we have that on the table right now. We actually passed, it's really complicated in Virginia. It has to pass the General Assembly. We have to have an election. It has to pass the newly elected General Assembly, and then it gets to go to the ballot for the constituents to vote for.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
For like a referendum?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that kind of sounds like there's a wacky thing here in Florida where we passed abortion because 57% of us voted for it, except no, we didn't actually, because you need 60%. And I still don't exactly understand why, because I think you only needed a little bit over half of the actual elected body, the House body of the local House to make it so
to petition it, right?
Yeah, but then you needed 60% of the population to vote for it, and it's like, well, why would we have that's a weird popular referendum that needs like more than a majority.
I feel like that was something that because I sadly follow DeSantis and your state ledge, along with like Tennessee and some other, pretty controversial ones pretty closely. And I think that's something that they kind of rammed through in the hopes of obviously killing that referendum to make it to the finish line, which it worked, I mean.
And then there's another thing where, and I'm sure you've experienced this, but like talking to men about anything having to do with women's reproductive health is the most irritating thing in the world, because like I would argue that states that have a 6-week allowance for abortion have almost effectively banned it. But a lot of guys, like I'll have debates on Twitter Spaces and people say, oh, like woman knows when she's pregnant, like about probably like, a couple days in or whatever. And I'm like, that's not at all the case all the time. And then people don't know, I didn't know this until I had a child. I didn't know that you counted the pregnancy weeks from the time of your period. I assumed it was like at conception. So if somebody gets pregnant, that's like 2 weeks in.
Yep.
And then if you miss your next period 2 weeks later, and then you test within that week.
So you're 5 weeks.
Yes, that's it. You're like, holy shit, I got to drive. Like, if the abortion clinic closes today, I'm out of limit. And we all know, everybody in this country knows Lake and Riley. I don't know anything about them other than I guess they were killed by an illegal immigrant. Nobody knows the names of any of the women in Texas who were, I read a story of this.
Katie Cox. I do.
Oh, okay. Well, good for you. Better than me. Yeah. There was
she's the one that had to flee the state.
Oh, there was a young woman who died of fucking sepsis.
Oh, yeah.
Because they had to ultrasound her like 3 times,
Yes.
I think, to confirm that the fetus was dead before doing it. It's like, holy fuck. And I think there have been 3 of those so far. There've been at least 2. I think I read of a third one.
I think the one you're talking about is Georgia, actually.
Was it Georgia?
Yes.
I thought it was Texas, but okay.
Yeah, there was. I think there was 3 women that they've now, and Georgia has since changed their state directive to not maintain that information, which is crazy. But so basically they don't even want to have that data available for us to be able to know that this is happening. I have a lot of conversations. So obviously I'm on TikTok, and TikTok debating is like, a thing. So I have a lot of friends that debate. So I'll jump on their lives most of the time because my life is too crazy to sit on a live for any extensive time. But I've had so many conversations with men, and it's really explaining the nuance. Again, like when they sit here and say, it says for the woman's life, I'm like, but this is the deal. Like the way the language is written, it is so vague. It is so arbitrary. A doctor can say, oh, your fluid has broken, like your membrane ruptured. There's no more fluid around the fetus. Fetus is still currently alive though. And that could last up to 72 hours. You're healthy right now. I can't do shit. And so in that period of 72 hours while you're basically waiting for this fetus to die, you could go septic, you could bleed out, you could go into a coma. I mean, so many things could go wrong. And the way the law is written is the doctor basically has to sit around and wait till those things go wrong. And it's like trying to teach people nuance, and they just don't want to hear it or believe that's like not a real thing in law. And I'm like, dude, law is written in a certain way to create these types of issues.
I've gone back and forth in my life, and where I'm at right now in terms of like, are people in general just really stupid or what's going on? And I think where I'm at right now is I think people in general are actually pretty smart. There's like a political switch that gets turned on and off for certain types of things. So for an abortion, it'll be like they'll read the law and they'll be like, oh, okay, well, life of the mother, and I mean, this is fine, right? And it's like, no. They're like you said, like, imagine you go to the hospital and you're pregnant, like your doctor's going to be treating you differently just by virtue of that, and the medical options available, and like, oh, okay, I guess. But if we take that exact same conversation and we're like, hey, this state wants to do something related to like red flag laws or something. It's like, whoa, hold on. Well, think of the implication. What's the chilling effect on if I get diagnosed with some kind of depressive disorder and then I have firearms, maybe it's going to discourage me from even going. And it's like, okay, okay. You have all the nuance. The thing that I almost blew my brains out when I read this on a thing that DeSantis signed. I did so much COVID and vaccine misinfo.
Yeah.
The hydroxychloroquine, the ivermectin, nobody knew anything about what it was. All these horrible N=4 retrospectives from Indonesia. When I saw that DeSantis had banned trans healthcare for youth in the state of Florida, and I saw on that little thing, it said there were no double-blind prospective trials done on trans youth study. I'm like, oh, so you do know what good medical trials are. That all that information was just absent when it came time to talking about other things.
Yeah.
That the selective skepticism is something that drives me crazy. And then on a quick thing, just on the education before we leave it completely, one of the things that drives me the craziest when it comes to talking about the Department of Education or education is I instantly, I don't want to say discredit, but anytime I hear somebody who will just talk about education in the United States and they don't immediately draw a huge distinction between K through 12 and colleges, these are totally different worlds, of how much we spend per student on the educational outcomes. Because if you want to say that we have issues with K through 12, that's fine. There are definitely funding issues and stuff where districts are underfunded. There is no such thing as a healthily funded school with 35 kids in a classroom. That's insane.
It's crazy.
And then they'll point to like, well, look at how much money they spend over at UCLA or, Harvard or whatever. It's like, bro, these in college. This is a totally different system. What are you talking about? Yeah. Going back on the education thing before we leave, just because you're working school administration, what do you think are some local changes that you would want to see that you think also carry over to other districts? I know you said Virginia is like pretty, where you live
we're
is
low on the
special.
funding formula. And apparently our governor's getting a lot of shit right now because we tested really poorly in math and like we're ranking near bottom, even though he's been like, look at all this. I'm destroying CRT and look how great our schools are. I'm like, no, actually, that's not true.
Yeah.
But no, I think that smaller class size is absolutely something we need to reevaluate. Incentivizing the education system, period. Like if we're not paying people a living wage, why are they going to go to these jobs that are quite honestly hard as shit? Like, I mean, they are. They're challenging jobs, and not just in the education field, like teaching. I'm talking about like support staff. I'm talking about driving the buses. I'm talking about the cafeteria workers. I mean, I can't tell you how impactful the cafeteria workers and custodian at my school are on students when it comes to like social emotional learning and like being a place that they can check in with. Like they're not a guidance counselor. Like they're literally these everyday average people that just see these kids all day, every day, and they build relationships with them. Like funding all of these different elements of the school is huge. And I think lastly, I'm not a big supporter of standardized testing. I was a guinea pig. I graduated high school in '99. So I was the first, in my senior year, I had to pass it and pass it to graduate high school. Like I had gotten a little guinea pig testing of it in '98. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, we're going to try these new testing programs. I'm like, okay. The next year, like, oh, by the way, remember those last year? You have to pass these this year if you want to get your high school diploma. I'm like, what the? Okay, cool. Mm-hmm. So, my kids have grown up with it. But the testing has gotten insane. These teachers have no ability to be innovative. They have no ability to really think outside the box when it comes to teaching because they are literally teaching to test. We get into, I'm talking about kindergarten. You have PALS tests. You have MAPS testing. You have all of this stuff. Then you hit third grade. You're doing all of that plus SOLs. I mean, they are constantly giving these like tests to see where they are. And they're not even getting an opportunity to teach them to be further along. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge disservice, I think, to our kids and to our educators. Like you're really curbing their ability to be good stewards of education.
Mm-hmm. So I'm a fan of having some kind of
absolutely.
marker. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious, how would you draw the line? Obviously not like exactly specifically, but I'm curious, like what does it look like in your mind, like a healthy amount of testing, or how would you even approach that, I guess? I
mean, I think doing like something right before the winter break, that we take this massive winter break for Christmas and New Year's, and then doing another one, obviously, right before the end of the year. I think the problem is that there's so many different testing going on for different little nuancy things that we are just hammering them with tests all the time. So really creating a structured, centralized test that's really, and
is that unique to Virginia, what you're talking about?
well, every state has standardized testing, but your testing is decided by your state government.
Okay.
But one of the things that I think is great, and my daughter actually was looking to do it with, oh my gosh, it was some local learning, Sylvan Learning Center. It's like a tutoring program. And it's something that a lot of private schools use, which again, it's like, look at what private schools are doing right, and let's add that into the school system. So they have these programs where you're doing some of the school work on kind of a learning-based program, whether it's math, whether it's English, whatever you're working on, phonics. And as you're doing it, you get to a certain point and the computer basically recognizes, okay, you're struggling here. Here's the things we need to work on. And it gives the teacher guidance on what they need to work on in small groups. It gives you opportunity to use the same database on this thing to like work on those little focus things and improve it. You go back a little while later, and this is something that's interactive that they're always playing on, and it's increasing their education without you even knowing it. So I'm trying to think of the name, but it's like basically like some type of technology program that's kind of learning as you go. And it changes with you as the student. That's not in the schools. Like, that's just not there. Like, literally it's like, oh, this is what's on the SOLs. Okay, they need to know all of this by heart by the time they take the 4th grade, U.S. Studies SOL. And you're like,
also, can you tell me what that stands for? Because it's very depressing.
Standardized. It's just standardized testing.
Oh, okay, because it sounds sad that like I got to go take my SOLs and it's like, you shit out of luck. Because that's what I hear when I say
it is shit out of luck. I think it is shit out of luck.
Okay, gotcha.
And the problem is the standardized testing, like every state, also decides whether you're accredited, whether you get funding from the state. Like, it has so much ramifications and pressure on the educators that, again, it kind of pulls us away. A teacher said it best to me when they said, they're frustrated because there was a big thing going on. I think it was election. And they was like, this is a great opportunity to teach us in their 4th grade U.S. Studies. But I couldn't, because that week we had to get this done by the end of the week, because we have to be meeting these markers. And so by the time they were at a point where they could learn about it, it wasn't relevant anymore. Kids didn't give a shit. So it's one of those things where you can take things that are happening right now, make it relevant to what you're learning, and still continue to add to their and make it interactive. And I think there's an element of that that's missing, I mean, across the nation, honestly. But, I just see it because, again, we're like so focused on these standardized tests.
I feel like I should ask my son's 13. I should ask him what they do for testing in Nebraska, because I feel like growing up, I took 2. I think it was called the ITBS, the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. Yeah,
I'm sure that you have your own version of it. I know Florida has one as well.
Yeah, but I feel like we only did that in like 4th grade and 8th grade.
Oh, okay. No, this is something we have to do every year from 3rd on.
And then are these tests, because for that was I want to say that was 2 or 3 days of you sit down and you fill in the bubbles, and it's kind of stressful. And okay, so it's like, oh yeah, that's
there's a lot of pressure. And then when you get into middle and high school, you're taking multiple, because you're taking them based on each course. So my daughter will take 5 SOLs at the end of the school year in high school.
Okay.
For each different course that she's taking that has a standardized test existing for it.
Damn. And that's so that the school maintains its accreditation and funding, and for the student to actually pass the
course. Yeah.
Yeah. Damn. Okay.
And to the point that they put so much leverage on it. Let's say you're in algebra and you take the algebra SOL and you pass it, and you have a certain GPA in that class, you basically get excused from the final exam. So you don't have to take the final exam for the actual course.
Okay.
That's how much emphasis they put on the SOL. That is the main focus, not even the final exam of the course you just completed. I
guess I wish it kind of worked like that, but almost the other way around. It would be nice if there was a way for the curriculum would have to get approved by the testing board, but if whatever your grade on the final exam was could be translated to your grade on the SOL. But I'm guessing the teachers probably don't grade the SOLs, right?
No.
You probably Scantron's or something that are sent into a central.
It's literally it is a curriculum that's sent down by the state, and then they have to complete it.
So I guess in your perfect world, what are you changing? Just reducing the amount of standardized testing?
Reducing the amount. I think there's a lot of pressure on the students. And again, I think that they are not learning to retain information and really invoking critical thinking. I think it's more about just I got to remember what box to fill in. And once I do, it's gone. And I was guilty of that even in my last 2 years of high school. And I'm freaking 43 now. So,
sure, yeah.
But another element I would love to see is universal pre-K, which is childcare for ages 3 and 4. So to kind of give that preparatory before they go into the school system, because we see a lot of issues of disparities between students that have had access to preschool versus those that haven't, and like the difference between their education level and their ability to sit in the classroom and just understand the whole social dynamic is night and day. And so I think something like that, which our state leg has tried to do actually, and is working towards funding it more broadly, and it passed. I don't know if my governor will veto it or not, but that is something that's on the table this year actually.
Yeah, the early education stuff is nice too because it can free up parents to work a part-time job if they can, and for special needs children, having that caught earlier, because sometimes due to no fault of the family, people just aren't aware sometimes of how children develop. You might get a kid that goes into kindergarten or first grade, and that's the first time the parent realizes like, oh, my kid has aphasia, like some severe speech impediment or some severe learning disability, or can't read, or is incredibly autistic more than I realized. And yeah, catching that obviously as early as possible. There's a lot of these people don't realize like stuff like dyslexia, like if you catch this like very, very, very early and you teach the kid how to read, I think in a different way, whatever, like these people can be fully ordinarily.
So my daughter who's 17 has it, and we didn't find out till a year ago.
Oh, geez, yeah. My first girlfriend in high school had it, and I think she read faster than I did, but her family caught it very, very, very early, so she was a very, very good reader. Right. But if you never realize it, then yeah, that must be a painful process, yeah.
I mean, she has ADHD too, so like, but she's just someone who really has to work really hard to do well, but if she loves what she's doing, like the CNA program, she's been blowing it out of the water, but it's because it's something that she really loves. She wants to do nursing eventually. And so I see that in her. Like if it's something that drives her, she'll do great. If it's something that bores her, God help us all, because we will not be trying.
Yeah. Okay, so education, women's rights, what other big issues, I guess, drive you to be involved politically?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a housing crisis across the nation, and it's really bad in the state. And I feel like every local government and even state government seems to be super retroactive or reactionary when it comes to policy, which is frustrating for me. Great example is this. I did a program last year, political leadership. I got to go to every region of the state and really meet leaders in their community, learn about their economic development, learn what they're doing differently than maybe my region or other regions. And one of them I went to was Danville, Virginia, which I don't know if you're familiar, but to put it clearly, MLK Jr. said that it was more racist than Birmingham, Alabama, if it gives you any insight of how bad Danville is.
Jeez.
So, of course, this was obviously during, pre-civil rights and everything, civil rights movement. But pretty bad area, known for just decimating an incompletely black business-owned street and reallocating those businesses to white ownership and flying Confederate flags and all of this thing. And we're talking like upwards of like 15, 20 years ago. This was kind of the namesake of this place.
Okay.
But they did some huge revitalization. They had new leadership that really stepped up and said, we don't want to see this anymore. This area has put forth some of the most great, prolific, like black leaders in the state of Virginia, across the nation. Like we deserve to, finally kind of change the narrative around Danville. So they've changed what was a river district that used to literally be a dumping ground. They completely cleaned it up. They made it the focal point. They urbanized and turned all of these old tobacco and textile manufacturing things that were literally just vacant lots into these beautiful apartments. So now there's like this city feel and urbanized feel there. They've got this big mega site that's brought in all of these, a casino's now over there. They've got, data centers, of course, that are big in Virginia. So they've brought in all of these jobs and all of this, economic growth. And they've watched it grow. They've watched it become more diversified. And in it, they've, obviously flourished their economy. However, as they're doing all of these things, they had housing at one point, and I'm talking like 3 years ago, that you could get a house, 1,100 square foot house, like really not much of anything, for $25,000, like nothing. Now those same houses are selling upwards of like 120, 200,000. Like they're skyrocketing because there was no local ordinance with their housing authority to mitigate these people coming in and buying these houses, real estate developers, and turning them into Airbnbs. So now they've lost all of this income property or real estate property for people that are actually moving in to work and live there, because they're all been, basically raptured by these real estate developers. And now after the fact, they're like, oh shit, we got to change our ordinances so this stops happening. So they did make some moves to do that, but it was like, at that point, what have you lost?
Yeah.
And so I see that continuously in Virginia. New Kent County is a part of my district, actually, and I lived there for 13 years. They are the fastest growing county in the state. And so they're having that same thing kind of happen, and they don't even have a housing authority. Like they don't even have anybody at the local government that's like, hey, let's talk about housing, let alone putting forth policy to protect it. So that's something that I really want to make a part of the conversation. Also a big fan of a millionaire's tax. I think Massachusetts did a great job with it. We have like over 270,000 millionaires that reside in Virginia. And right now, if you make $17,001 or you make $1.2 million, you both pay 5.75% in taxes.
Okay.
Which is crazy. Like, it's just crazy to me. So it's something that actually I've discovered through polling is pretty popular with Virginians as well. I think people are reaching a point where they're like, they could be paying more, or they could be adding more value to it, especially when people's local taxes continue to go up because they're trying to accommodate for school costs and all of the things that continue to go up because of inflation that the state's not picking up the tab on.
One of the saddest things to me, I had a high school teacher, Jaborski, I might have been saying, he had a very weird name, but he used to say something, it was like a little quote he had. He said, the worst thing in the world that you could ever have is potential. And one of the things that it makes me so incredibly sad, especially over the past 5 years when I look at the United States, when you talk about that revitalization project, I feel like the U.S. is still in a position to where if we have the mind to do something, my God, we can deploy the resources to do literally anything. We can move, we could deorbit the moon if we wanted. We can do anything in this country. And when people come together in a community, whether it's at a very local level, city level, state, or federally, we can just do things that are phenomenal. And it's so sad to see all of the political schizophrenia that we are suffering right now, that we cannot get on board with literally fucking anything. It seems like half this country right now doesn't even want the government to exist. And that's so frustrating to me. When you talk about the housing thing, I guess more particularly, this is where my ardent, very hardcore capitalist side comes out. One issue that I have kind of with Americans, and I think it's an American thing, is we really, really, really hate high density housing. Like, I feel like the American dream is you need a house with the fence, and it's got to be single family. And you see like the pictures of like San Francisco. What?
I disagree. But
you think? Yeah.
I don't think it. I mean, I don't think that should be the American dream anymore. But
oh no, yeah, I agree. Or what part do you disagree with? I'm curious.
No, I disagree. I disagree. I don't think as many people feel that way as they think they do.
Oh, okay.
I think that mindset is starting to fade away, especially as like the more younger people are coming up wanting to own property and be invested.
What's interesting is like for Gen Z, like if you talk to a lot of them, or so they say on the internet, that like, they're like, I'm not gonna be able to own a house, or this is horrible. I remember I debated one kid, so hilarious. This guy was 24 and he talked about how he had just graduated college and he thought he'd be able to buy a house, and now he's not gonna be able to get one until he's 30. And it's funny because if you, not to talk anything of the Europeans, because I hate Europe. No, I'm just kidding. But when you go over to Europe and you talk to their young people, they're like, homes are things that you buy basically when you retire or you're very rich. But if I'm going to move to a major city, of course I'm living in a flat. I'm living in an apartment in some mixed zone area. But in the United States, it feels like living in an apartment is still kind of seen. Maybe it's changing, but it's kind of seen as like you're kind of a loser, or you haven't made it yet, or you don't have like your house for your family. I think that's a right-wing pushing point, though. I
think that's something that the manosphere is kind of pushing. And really that red pill kind of idea where like you need to own your own property and you need to, I feel like when you actually talk to people, especially younger people, that's not really the goal. Like, for me, I got married super young the first time. I'm second married, but I got married super young at age 20. I bought my first house at 20 years old. Like, that's crazy. It's cool, I guess, but like, I don't have that house anymore. I don't live in that house. We now own again, but in a different part of the town. But like, I look at my daughter who is 20 now, and she has been renting her own apartment for 2 years while she puts herself through college. And like, she's very much a girl after my own heart, because I was like that at her age, and working full time. And like, she likes it. Like, she likes that lifestyle. She doesn't feel like she needs to buy a house, or, I do think she thinks like one day, if and when she settles down and like wants to have a family, that's something that maybe is on the horizon. But I don't feel like that's something that's, on her like horizon right now.
Did she grow up in a kind of suburban area?
Yeah,
okay. I wonder how much that impacts it, because I grew up in a suburban area and I didn't live in an apartment in a big city until I was 30 for the first time. And after having that experience, I was like, I'm never going to live in a suburb again, because the idea of like being able to go down an elevator and then walk outside, and I've got like restaurants and coffee and everything, and I don't have to go into the grocery store. Like, here's like 2 hours out of my day, like I can just walk down to the store and pick something up. But then I feel like sometimes I guess hear from people in the city, it's like, man, I wish I could live in a quieter house or a little suburb or whatever, and hang out my backyard with friends.
I think it's always like the grass is always greener on the other side. I really think that's what it comes down to. And I think sometimes when people actually acquire what they think they want, they find they're not as happy. I raised her in literally New Kent, which is pretty rural. We'd have to drive like 30 minutes to go to the grocery store, which isn't too bad, but it's still a bit of a hike.
Jeez, okay.
And so, small school division of like one elementary school, one middle school, one high school. Like, you went with the same students from day up all the way up. So she was there until 6th grade. And then I moved her into Williamsburg area, which we were still in kind of a like condominium for a bit. We lived in city of Williamsburg proper, which was great. Like I love the idea of like going out and just going for a run, going down the street to like get fresh bread or go to the restaurants or whatever. And so that was where she lived for a couple years during her high school. And then we lived in like a suburban area again when she graduated. But we're close to everything. Like we don't have to, we drive like 5 minutes to get to anything we want. And, she's been driving since she was 16. She's very mobile. She's very independent. She's always been like that. So, but she loves having her independency. And I think for her, the apartment gives her that.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that your family is a little bit MAGA leaning. How do you balance having run as a Democrat and then having people in your life, your family, that are very conservative? Do those conversations just not come up? Or are Thanksgiving, is that like a combat time for you, or what? How does that work?
So it wasn't too bad early on, especially during the campaign year. I had a few moments. It's really disheartening when you like go on the internet and you see someone who is quite literally a family member, a close family member, and they're reposting like literally your opponent's most recent, Facebook post. So
my mom will send me stuff on text like, Mom, this guy called me a cucklord, like this, this guy's like personally fucking gone at me. And she's like, Stevie, not everybody's perfect.
Oh,
like,
God. Okay.
Right, Mom.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I know the feeling very well. Yeah.
So it's a little disheartening. For me, like me and my mom are great. She's, I was raised in a pretty apolitical household. I had no idea how my parents voted, quite honestly. They never talked about it. They didn't discuss it. It was one of those whole, like, we don't talk religion, we don't talk money, we don't talk politics kind of things. So I didn't really have a political leaning at all. We didn't go to church. Like, I was really raised kind of in a very, like, what is it called? Free range parenting. I was latchkey kid, true 90s kid. Okay. And it wasn't until I married my first husband that I kind of married into a hyper conservative Christian family. Like Southern Baptist, raised my kids. We were in church 3 times a week. I taught Sunday school. I was a Awanas leader. I was in the choir. Like I was in it to win it, okay? And it was funny because outside of abortion access, which is the only thing that we never talked about, just because I'm very open about this, but I had an abortion, I was like, no, government doesn't belong in my body. Sorry, not sorry. So we never talked about that in that family. But, I had a lot of Republican-leaning views. They kind of brought me into that sphere of like thinking this idea like, oh, people that get welfare are on handouts and, like all of these really negative connotations that kind of come with this Republican mindset when we're looking at the whole world. I was very isolated. I mean, I went to a pretty diverse high school, but once I lived in New Kent, most of the people I was surrounding myself were kind of middle class, white, kind of same scenario, same lifestyle, same childhood. So it wasn't until a lot later that I realized I had some very different political views personally. It was things that I went through. I was on social safety nets when I got divorced for a couple of years. So it was one of those moments like, oh, fun fact, people that work their asses off and are just trying to take care of their kids need these types of programs. And then, of course, ended up working in the school system when I married my now husband. COVID happened, which was just a shit show, and it really kind of exposed the radicalization of everything. So last year, unfortunately, my stepdad and me kind of had a pretty massive falling out because he was basically one of the electors that would sign the petition if Trump won Virginia for my district.
Oh, when you said that earlier, I thought you were speaking like metaphorically. You were like, oh, he would have been one of the guys.
He was one of the
actually
elected.
Oh, okay.
He was elected to be one of the electoral college people, however that is. So like he would have got to sign the paper and have the official part of the Virginia election in regards to electing Donald Trump.
Jeez.
Yeah. So it's really difficult to be like, I'm a very loud, outspoken Democratic candidate, very active, big community advocate. And then my literal stepfather is, hi, I'm going to sign the paper if Trump wins Virginia. So there was a disconnect. And unfortunately, online, like we still see each other. We're still super cordial, but like we don't go our way to like hang out.
Can I ask for the Southern Baptist family, for your husband or your ex-husband?
Yeah.
Were they nice people?
So yes, here's what's funny. This is tough.
I asked this because like my mom Okay.
Yes,
So my mom
everyone
is,
on the outside thinks they're wonderful people.
well, and my mom is Cuban. She came over when I think when she was 5 or 6, and she has infinite charity in her heart for Cuban people that come to the United States. I remember there were like 2 national tragedies in my household. It was 9/11 and it was the Elian Gonzalez thing. I don't know if you remember that with the little boy. Yeah. Oh my goodness. And
Him being sent back and
oh my goodness, yeah. But when my mom speaks about like obviously Mexican illegal immigrants, it's a totally different story in terms of how she approaches them. But personally, I know for a fact, because I've lived with her for my whole life, if my mom were to see a Mexican illegal immigrant that came to this country to work or whatever else, my mom would give them the clothes off her back. I know she would.
My
because
mom
she's
and
that kind of person.
my former mother-in-law would as well. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to going to the ballot box, if there was like a murder all illegal immigrants, I think she'd tick yes. Like, Mom, what the what's going on here? Like, it is impossible for me to reconcile a lot of the, I don't want to say MAGA psychopathy, but I will say the MAGA psychopathy of their policy positions versus, at least in my own family, and conservatives I've known, it's like, you guys are not like this psychopathic in real life. Like, what's going on here? The connection is insane to me. I was curious with your family.
I think the problem is when they go to the ballot box, they truly believe that they're, like, I agree. Like, they are good-hearted people. They care about, like, their fellow man. Like, they want to see people have the best opportunity possible, blah, blah, blah. However, they believe that the politicians they're voting for share that value. And that's where the disconnect is. So, like, all the things that I was terrified of happening when Trump won, that is happening, that Trump won, I was saying to my mom and me would have coffee. We still do. Like, every 2 weeks, we sit down and have a coffee date and, like, really just kind of discuss politics, from, like, the trans issues to, you know, the abortion issue, like, all of these things. And 9 times out of 10, she pretty much agrees with my stance. But then she follows up, I don't think he's going to do that. I don't think he's going to go quite that far. And so that's the element that I feel like I'm always coming up against, because truly good people, like your mom, like my mom, like my former mother-in-law, like, I do believe that they want to, you know, do it in a way that we would agree with on the other side.
Yeah.
But they keep forgetting that their politicians do not give a shit.
I guess, yeah. But then there's like this boiling frog scenario where they'll say that, like, well, I don't think he'll do that. But then when he does, it's not a big deal. And
True.
It drives me crazy.
That element drives me crazy too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at yesterday, and I know so many Republicans that support Zelensky and our involvement in Ukraine. And so it's hard for me to see. I see a lot of them kind of like, what the hell's happening? And then I see the other ones that are like defending it. Like, well, you know, he should, like, I don't know if you saw Lindsey Graham's interview. Did you see his?
Like a 2-minute thing after?
Yeah.
Yes, unfortunately.
Okay, so it was wild to me that he's like, I spoke to Zelensky this morning. I told him not to take the bait. The fact that we live in a situation where you have to forewarn a leader of a nation that your president is going to bait him into a downward spiral. That's like the fact that you're defending the guy that intentionally baited him, if that's what you're calling it. Where's the line here? Like, why are we not calling out the bait versus the fact that Zelensky's just trying to defend his country?
I see so many parallels for when I engage with conservatives, to where my audience is very critical of me sometimes, which I appreciate to some extent, but it's like, I'll argue with a guy who puts out 7,000 just beyond stupid statements, and I'll either lose my temper or I'll say something at the end that's like incorrect. Be like, oh, you have to try way harder on this and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I appreciate the feedback and that's true, but god damn, when this guy has done like 50 million things, and that's what it feels like sometimes with the conservatives, where it's like, well, you know, Democrats should have done a better job on messaging on trans stuff. And it's like, I mean, I can kind of agree with that, sure, but how is it that Trump is able to dance away from every single conspiracy, every single problem, every single thing? There are so many. What happened to the Democrat weather machines that sent the hurricanes, or what happened to the UFOs that they said were taking over New Jersey?
Eating the cats and dogs. What happened to those cats and dogs?
Yeah, like Vance came out and literally said, like, listen, if we have to fabricate on CNN, I couldn't believe he said that.
Yeah.
Vance, like, well, what does it say? Like, if I have to make a story, we have to get people to care about these issues. And I was like, bro, are you okay? Like, why would you even say that out loud? Trump
but they don't care.
Yeah, Trump gave the game away. Also, yesterday, at that press conference where he said towards the end, he's like, this is why I let this go on for so long, so that you could see after Zelensky and Vance had their back and forth. Like, why would you even say that? Like, And then to see my mom, my parents talked to me so much about the Cold War. They were both in the Air Force. My mom flew the Looking Glass mission where they're looking for nuclear weapons, and she made me watch The Day After and talked about how evil. And for her to just be like, well, I texted her this morning. And I was like, Mom, why would we treat Zelensky that way? Why can't we help Ukraine? And I think her response was, well, Stevie, we don't want to go to World War III. And I always used to hear growing up, it's like the way that we prevent these wars is by being strong. That's what the United States does. And I remember writing articles in my school newspaper defending the Iraq War, the second one, the bad one, because I was so Republican and I was so bought into it all. And to see my parents like become full on, I know you said you weren't as interested in foreign policy, but like this foreign policy isolationist position where we can no longer lead or do anything around the world. And if there was ever a situation that called for American leadership or assistance, it would be Ukraine.
It's this one. I mean, I have conversations a lot with people that I feel like did people forget history? And I struggle when I talk to people that are super intelligent, super checked in and things like that, know about foreign policy. And I'm like, we went to the shipyard out in where I live in Williamsburg area. And my dad who passed, but my dad worked there. My ex-husband worked there, but the shipyard is where we build nuclear submarines. It's the only second area in the nation that builds nuclear submarines and only place that builds aircraft carriers. So we are like a massive installation for defense. Mm-hmm. Okay. So when we went out there, it was really funny because I'm in this room with my cohort of this political leadership program of all different political affiliations. Like we have people that are straight up, very far left. We have people that are very centrist. We have people that are very Republican. We had very different, diverse political ideologies. And you're sitting in this room with these people that, in my opinion, I guarantee every one of them voted for Trump. Just the way they carried themselves and what their job roles are, and all of them made it very clear that World War II happened because of America's need to be isolated. Our isolationism got in our way. Our ego got in our way. We got complacent, and then Pearl Harbor happened, and we're like, oh shit, we gotta participate, And so here is naval leaders that have been in this world for 20, 30 years, sitting here speaking to us in a literally like what is by definition a skiv, telling us how, shelling us ads from China where you would think it was us, talking about aircraft carriers. He's like, no, that was a China ad that they basically are, they're moving in on us. They're going to outperform us. They're going to produce us in the next 5 to 10 years if we don't start changing the narrative, if we don't start dealing with our workforce issues, if we don't, meanwhile, we're laying off shit ton of federal government agency, people. But, all of these things. And the people in the room that were in there were like, okay, see, this is you. Like, it made me think of Ukraine when we're talking about it. Like, we can't walk away from someone who is a clear dictator, who clearly wants to, recreate USSR, who's moving into, towards Poland. Like, he's not going to stop. And like, even Zelensky said, like, he's never abided by a ceasefire. Like, why is a ceasefire my only offer here when we know that this is not a man that cares about deals and keeping them. Yeah. And so when you look at that and you look at history, I get so frustrated when I'm talking to people that I do know are super intelligent and super locked into these types of, the military part of it, and then go, well, I agree with what Trump did yesterday. And I'm like, why? Like,
we've literally done the appeasement thing before. Like, it couldn't be a clear analog. And then it's like, I don't even argue Ukraine, Russia. Israel, Palestine is much more interesting to me because there's like a very rich history on both sides where you can go really deep into the justifications on both sides. By comparison, Ukraine, Russia is very boring. It's a very obvious, like, good guy, bad guy conflict. Right. Like, if there was ever a cause for supporting a side, it would be a country that's being invaded by another country because that country is not happy about a leader being basically kicked out of the country. And it's very, very, very frustrating, especially now talking to Ukrainian friends. Like, what happened to all the jokes about they're about to find out why we don't have universal health care, haha, because we spend so much on our military. And it's like, okay, well, I guess all of that meant nothing because I guess we're not going to do anything with it or help anybody with it. But hopefully, I guess when we buy the Gaza Strip, I guess that'll be our foreign policy contribution.
That video, Jesus.
Yeah. Man, what a month. It's been a horrifying.
It's been a horrifying 5 weeks, man.
Politically, as somebody who's politically active, I imagine your children are probably kind of politically in tune. You said they watch political TikToks and stuff.
Yeah.
How do you, in your household with your family, how do you instill hope? I need help from my audience. My God.
I think me running gives them a little hope. My two oldest, especially, who are obviously, my youngest is 13. So, my children have been, unfortunately, always ones that know probably too much,
Okay.
I guess. I've never been one to like shield information or the reality of situations from them, whether we're talking politics or just everyday real life. I'm pretty open with them, and they've been luckily very open with me. Like I have a super great relationship with my daughters. I have all 3 girls, but my 2 oldest are definitely more tapped into the political thing. They're very outspoken. My middle one has become more and more outspoken, which is not her style, honestly, but I feel like she's kind of seen like, Mom's like talking about this shit. It seems really important. So I think just kind of instilling this idea that like we're going to fight for what we believe in and what we want. And me running, I think, is a huge catalyst. That they're very proud of me running. My younger 2 actually knocked doors with me last cycle and got to really experience like that, which it had its moments where they're like, this is intense. I don't know if we want to do this, Mom. But I think kind of just keep showing up. I have a bad habit of like doom scrolling, which is tough when you are politically active. So you have to like know what's going on and be up to date and be informative to other people and try to be kind of somewhat of a light to other people while you're silencing like I'm dying inside a little bit. So I think it's a really hard balance. I definitely am going to have to set some boundaries when I move into this campaign year. We have a campaign manager that's literally moving in today. So I know March we're going to be ramping things up. And so it's going to be shifting my mindset kind of a little bit away from the federal government because, unfortunately it's taking up a lot of time in my head right now, real estate, and really honing in on the state races, the local elections that are happening because we have board of supervisors and school board elections as well. So just kind of trying to keep people like, hey, we have an opportunity at the state level from the governor to the AG to the LG to the House of Delegates to maintain or create and maintain a strong Democratic fortress here in Virginia to the best that we can. We need people that are going to stand up against this, president and anything that might come down the pipeline federally that could harm our government, our workforce, our economy, which is already happening. And right now, we don't have that leadership. Like Governor Youngkin is sucking the teat and licking the boots of Trump because he can't run again. We have one-term president or one-term governor, so he's not able to run again, and he doesn't care. Like he's a millionaire. His kids go to private school. Like he's got his life set and predetermined. He wants some opportunities on the cabinet. He wants to probably run for president at one point. I know that's in his back of his mind, and so he's going to let Virginia burn at Trump's behest and pretend like he's doing something about it, but he's not.
When you said that when you went door knocking, I think this is before we started rolling, but you mentioned that when you knocked on doors, I think you said here 6,000 doors. And then I think before the cameras were rolling, you said you knocked on a lot of doors of people who didn't vote frequently or like independent Republican voters.
Yeah.
I don't remember if that was on camera or not, so I'm just repeating that in case.
Yeah.
When you talk to those people, what are a couple issues that they hear that like the light turns on a little bit? Where like, oh, I didn't know that, or I didn't consider voting for a Democrat for that, or are there anything that like issues that play really well, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the door. Honestly, like I said, it's when you look at our district, it is so diversified. We have like a very rural part of it, and then we have a very affluent, wealthy, educated part of it, and then we have everything in between. And I always talk about when you're knocking doors, you really need to know your audience and know what the topics are going to be. So I had everything from people talking to me about like the trans issue at the doors to people asking about, why should I care about education, public education? I remember one conversation and specifically where I went into a neighborhood, Governor's Land, kind of a nice, not gated, but it's a pretty wealthy, area, older community. And I knocked on the door and they basically kind of berated me and saying like, why should my taxes go to public school? And I'm like, well, for starters, do you like where you live right now? And they're like, yeah. And I said, do you like the fact that your property has pretty good value and is holding its value? And they're like, yeah. I said, so if our schools completely, I didn't say this, but shit the bed, and our schools fail and they go down, we lose accreditation, we lose funding, we see a lower and lower test scores coming out of our school division, that is disproportionately going to harm your property value. Because the reality is people are not going to come here. Businesses are not going to come here. The guide of everybody moving into an area is always schools, whether you have a family or not, because that is going to be the catalyst on how successful and how prosperous your communities are. And so when you present it in a way, which I had to do, I think there was a lot of conversations about like funding of public education. We spend too much. You kind of mentioned that, and that tends to be a more right-leaning talking point. Housing, I was in communities where they are sitting here and they're in their 60s, and their 30-year-old son is still living at home because they can't afford to live on their own. So kind of addressing those issues and the fact that not only it's a wage issue where people can't work a full-time job and actually sustain for themselves, and it's also a conversation about we don't have accessible housing. We need more like you said, urbanized style housing and being developed in these areas, which people are on board with. But then you get in these little nuances. How do we talk about it? Is it low income? Is it workforce? Change. It's like we have to change the language to make it, appeal to anybody in the area, depending on where you're talking. I think one of the big issues too was like guns, which was funny to me. I remember one time I was knocking on a door. This guy was actually a super Democrat, and he sits on the porch with me and he goes, "So what are you going to do to get rid of all the guns?" And I looked at him, I said, "Sir, that's not happening. Like, let's be so for real." And I said, "There's more guns than people in this country. Like, guns are not going anywhere." I said, "But we can talk about common sense reform. Like, I'm a big fan of red flag laws. I'm big, there's things on the table. I struggled a little bit. Delegate Helmer, he actually introduced a assault weapons ban. It will be vetoed. It's not going to finish, but he introduced it again. It passed again because we have a Democratic majority. And the one he introduced the previous cycle, I kind of condemned because there's no grandfather clause. And I said, there's no way in hell you're going to tell people that already own this firearm that in this year and a half time, you have to get rid of it, transfers ownership to someone who lives outside of the state. I'm like, that's the dumbest thing you can ever do. There's no support for this. It did pass, which I was shocked, but of course it got vetoed. But this time he did change the language. There was a grandfather clause, and there's just this nuance about, I think the gun issue takes over sometimes for the right and the left. And I always ask people on the right, I'm like, can you show me a piece of legislation that the left has introduced that's like fully banning all your guns, or and they're like, no. And I'm like, then why are we still talking about this?
The two issues that I always thought that if either party could drop this, it would propel them into huge, big single digit. I know what you're gonna say. Yeah, the abortion and the gun thing.
Guns again.
Yeah, guns are just not. I feel like there are so many other issues related to gun violence, namely income disparity and poverty and lack of employment opportunities. Yeah, I just feel like going after guns is such a political loser. And I was really happy to see Kamala and Tim stay away from that as much as possible. We own guns and that's it. It's like, okay, thank God.
I own a gun. I had a concealed weapons permit for several years. My ex-husband was 100. I'm very familiar with guns, very comfortable around guns. I recognize this responsible gun ownership thing. I think the problem is we're a little free with giving them to everybody and anybody, and the access. I do think the access is a little extreme in some parts of this nation. I mean, it depends on where you are. But it's funny to me to see places where they have open carry, and then you see police threatening people that are open carrying because maybe they don't like who they are. I'm like, wait, but your state's open carry.
Sure.
So I mean, there's this, I feel
there's a huge issue when it comes to politics and this is the most frustrating thing, is when you argue with people, a lot of people, their positions are concealed. And so when you're arguing with somebody, you don't know what they're actually arguing. So if you want to have a discussion, immigration is a really good example. Education is a really good example, where when you're arguing with somebody over how a school should be funded or whatever, sometimes I'll be 10 minutes into a conversation oh, I'm wasting my fucking time. You don't give a fuck how much teachers make, or you don't care about this. You just want to abolish all public education. You want to do homeschool for everybody. Why are we wasting our time arguing about class size? I mean, you just hate education. You should just start it with that, because now, and it's the same thing with the gun thing too, where I think conservatives, to some extent, are fearful of Democrats who do want to ban all the guns and take them away. And there definitely are those Democrats, especially younger people out there that are like that. But then on the flip side, there are conservatives who want to argue against some kind of gun law for whatever reason. But their position is just that they think everything should be legal no matter what. There should be no restrictions whatsoever.
Right. I mean, I've talked to people that want tanks and bazookas.
Sure, yeah. And I feel especially as somebody with a child, I feel like there are some pieces of legislation that I feel like most people should be on board with. If you have a child in your household, having to take a 2-hour class on gun safety for at least how to store a firearm. I feel like these are things where everybody could probably be on board with stuff like this.
Well, that's one of the bills. So that was one of the bills actually that got introduced last cycle and this cycle, or this session, last session, was a safe storage gun law, which basically says, and they even gave them a tax incentive last session so they could buy the freaking storage unit.
Oh, yeah.
On top of that. So ironically, the tax thing passed the storage bill that requires you to store that if you have a minor in the house, basically saying, hey, if your minor gets a hold of this firearm because you did not safely store it and they unalive themselves or harm somebody else or themselves, you're going to be held accountable at the highest extent of the law with a felony charge. I don't think that's a hard ask. And in fact, most Republicans that I talk to agree that that's not a hard ask.
Especially because that would be the least of my concern, is getting charged with felony. My biggest concern would be my kid just killed himself because of a firearm that I ostensibly bought to protect my family. That's the worst of all possible outcomes.
Right. And so most people are on board with that. However, I think this comes back into messaging. It gets hijacked in kind of right-wing spaces, and it becomes more than what the actual bill is.
Yeah. Oh, they know that you bought a gun safe because you applied for the tax thing, so they've got a list now of everybody that has a firearm. They're going to come and get them.
Yes. So I think that's the part that on the left there's a lot of combative. We are combating rhetoric, and I always say that. When I talk to people at the doors, that's like my number one thing. Like, are you voting for rhetoric or are you voting for results? Because if you're voting for such and such because they said X, Y, Z, but then I show you on policy they voted against X, Y, Z. Did you actually vote for XYZ? Or did you vote for rhetoric? I think that's the conversation that I found me having the most at the doors, was kind of making things that seemed very black and white on paper, no matter what the issue was, realizing, hey, there's some gray area, let's talk about it. Yeah. And I'll show you where I am on it based on how I feel and my personal stance. And I'll show you where she stands on it because I have a voting record to show you that. And so that, I think that's why I did so well. Not to mention, I have never been very publicly political up until the last few years. I always had political things. My poor husband had to hear me vent my ass off, for years during COVID and stuff before I made my first TikTok video. But, so people close to me knew where I stood, but I was not broadcasting my political stances. And so the good thing about that is I'm in a lot of spheres. I work out regularly at Orange Theory. I have a family community there. I'm a runner. I'm secretary of our local running community, our Colonial Road Runners Board. And I'm very active with that. My husband's a vice president. I'm in that circles. I work in the school system. I have family and students and all of that. I'm active with different boards in the area and communities. So my activism in other ways that are not politically related have given me access to people that don't always align with me politically, but like me and recognize I stand for good things. Yeah. And I think that's been a huge catalyst in me doing so well and being so successful in that district. And then Harris won my district this past election. So I know that people thought Virginia didn't do as well and went more to Trump. But the problem is that if you actually break down the districts, my district outperformed, did far better than they did when Trump ran previously. And Harris won our seat by 51.5%. to 48.5% of Trump. So the numbers are already there for me to make the margin that I didn't make in the last cycle. I think it's just having the conversations, hard as they may be, and talking to the voters. Yeah.
I interviewed a lot of the DNC chair candidates who
I watched some of those, yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that came up over and over again that I kind of agree with is it feels like when a Democrat has lost, if a district is more than +5, it's basically written off as unwinnable for the rest of all of time, and then they don't even try to, yeah. And then you have these people, one of the guys was, I think it was James Skoufis.
Yep, he was the one I really liked that you interviewed, yeah.
Yeah, who was in a +30 Republican district. Yeah, but he won his elections. One of the weirdest questions, strangest questions, insightful, sad, I don't know what you would say, but I asked him afterwards, just because I was curious, because I appeal sometimes to broad groups of people, and one of the things that I have a big issue with is how do I appeal to so many different groups of people without also losing myself? And I asked him that question: when you're doing these conversations in front of these Republicans, how do you stay true to your democratic values? Do you ever worry that you're straying too far or whatever? And he didn't have he was like, you got to feel that out. It's very difficult. And I definitely empathize with that. It's very difficult. How do you appeal to Republican voters without going so far off the deep end, especially now when MAGA seems to stand for things that are getting harder and harder to view the other person as a human being on. There were, for the neocons, there are things that I disagree with heavily, but it's I kind of get it, sure. But for a lot of the MAGA stuff, the issue is that on the neocons, and this might just be ageism, right? Maybe because we're younger, we view things differently, whatever. I felt man, I super disagree with you, but I understand, we all want to build a better America. You see it way differently than I do. But it feels like so many of the MAGA positions are born out of this vitriolic, conspiratorial, every single thing. I said this 2 years ago, everything is a conspiracy now. Nothing can ever happen with anything, even when it's their side that's doing it over and over again. You saw the huge goof with the Epstein stuff, right? All these influencers.
One of my delegates in my state was one of the influencers in that room, Nick Freitas.
Really? Oh, okay.
Yeah. And he made cover. He made a video to run cover for Pam Bondi, which was funny. and he got hit hard on Twitter.
Oh my God.
It was gross. Yeah, I mean, the fact that like nobody acknowledges how many pictures and video there are of Epstein with Trump is crazy to me. But
if there would have been a single video of Epstein saying Kamala or Biden was my best friend, we would be hearing that nonstop. I listened to some of these tapes on stream, and my audience is like, is this deep faked or whatever? It's like, no, you've just never heard it before because Republicans don't talk about it, and they dictate the entire media agenda on every level somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know how, but they do.
Even with Diddy, like the Diddy conversation. Oh, Kamala Harris is with Diddy. I'm like, Trump's hung out with
like 9 different photos or whatever.
There's literally a video of him defending him when a woman's like literally like, yeah, I'm not a big fan of Diddy. He's like, oh, he's my friend. I don't like that. And I'm like, whoa.
Or like the only reason you know Fauci's name or all these people in Trump's government is because when something happens under Trump, it's never Trump's fault. It's always the people under him. And it's like, did Epstein kill himself? Personally, I read through the
I always talk about that all the time.
What?
I always talk about that all the time.
I think he did. I think that there's compelling
I do too. But
oh, yeah. But if he didn't, Trump was the fucking president. Trump's like secretary of something was the lawyer who helped him escape the big charges, I think in like 2004 or something. And he was the president, and Epstein died under his watch.
Yes.
So if anybody was ever going to kill him, why wouldn't it have been Donald Trump?
It could have been the guy in like 9 pictures and multiple videos.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. People keep emailing me this, and I don't want to, but people are like, you should just like stop all the bullshit that you do, and you should just argue all the conspiracies. Like, was J6 a Fedsurrection? Yes. And Donald Trump did it. Or was Epstein killed? Yes, because of Donald Trump's FBI. You should just say it, but like argue from the other end, because it's honestly, the evidence is way more compelling. If you want to start drawing like all the links or whatever, then fuck it, let's do it. Yeah.
It's rough. It's funny how the worst of the worst thing, like I love, and I've heard you argue this, but I love when I hear about the COVID lockdowns. The lockdowns only happened under Trump.
Yes. Oh, nobody knows that. Yeah.
I'm like, Biden locked down. Biden did not lock down shit. Okay, states still had some lockdowns under Biden by their state mandate. Biden didn't do anything. He didn't authorize anything. He literally just helped the vaccine roll out. That was it. I'm like, why are we having this conversation?
It's like you feel crazy.
I do. I feel crazy sometimes.
I think Dave Smith brought it up on Piers Morgan, where he said 2020 was the worst year for freedom of speech ever. And I'm like, who was president? Why does somebody do this? Or the fact that when Trump was running his campaign, he was like, weren't you better off 4 years ago? No, everybody hated life 4 years ago. What are you talking about?
I was locked in my house, my guy, with my kids. No, I was not loving life. It is crazy.
I don't know what happened to the boomers. I remember growing up and I heard so often, like, be careful for the internet. You'll end up believing everything you see. It's like, yeah.
And then they got a hold of the internet.
And then you guys, yeah. I didn't realize the worst day of my life. I thought it was the best day. It was in like 2013, I think, when I asked my mom, I was like, well, Mom, how you doing? Still listening to Glenn Beck? She's like, no, Steve, I don't really listen to Glenn Beck or those guys anymore. I'm like, oh, that's really good. It wasn't good because she started getting all of her news from Facebook. And I was like, oh, fuck. Okay, I see it. But I didn't realize until 10 years later what that actually meant.
Yeah. I mean, that's been it. So I mentioned to you, I don't know if we've said on the podcast, but I mentioned to you that my first intro to politics, like really deep diving it and kind of destroying my mental health, was watching my own family member post some of the most radicalized shit I've ever seen in my life on Facebook, and me going, well, who are these people that he's posting? Where is he getting this information from? And so the one person that I found was this UK basement dweller named Simon Parks, and he's sharing these videos of this guy insisting that like there's tunnels under the White House and Biden's presidency is going to be, or inauguration is going to be stopped because Trump's the real president, and he's sharing this, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, like this is insane. And so I'm like, who is this guy? So I go and like Google this guy, and I fall down this rabbit hole of hell where this man quite literally in an earlier interview in UK on like some, I don't know, talk show, basically details his time having consensual sex with a London farmer girl that was a hologram that was actually an alien and got her pregnant and has an extraterrestrial child, and then he was brought back on the mothership years. Like this was like a real story that he shared publicly and was legitimately serious. And I'm like, I remember sending it to my stepdad and going, this is the guy you're currently resharing that's saying we're going to like, the presidency is not legitimate. And he's like, you need to look more into things. I'm like, okay. So I did. And I hated my life for it. Learned all about how we're not a constitution. We're a corporation. Like I heard all the different crazy conspiracy theories over the years. And started making content to tell other people about the crazy conspiracy shit that was happening.
One of the things that drives me the craziest, one of the worst talking points, and I argue with so many people about this, was the we're not a democracy, we're a republic.
Yes.
And Republicans said that right up until they won the popular vote, and now I hear we're a democracy. We're a democracy. The people voted for Trump. He has a mandate from the people to do all these things. We're a democracy. Oh, okay, so it did matter. It just didn't when you didn't have the popular vote. Do you feel like when it comes to Democratic messaging, you said that you have like an interest in how Democrats can change their messaging. What do you think? What's the big problem? What's the big stumbling block? What do you think happened or has happened over the past several years, I guess?
I mean, to the past election, I think there's an issue of assuming that you know your audience or assuming that you know how people want to be spoken to. So I said something really funny last year when I announced I was running again to a local reporter. And I said, please don't make this sound weird. But I said, I can't stand Trump, obviously. I hate his rhetoric. I hate the fact that he punches down on most vulnerable citizens to kind of elevate his message. Like, that's literally what it is. However, I think he does a really good job of kind of meeting people where they are. And what I mean by that is he will go into these spaces. He may say some of the most radicalized, dumb takes you've ever heard in your life, but he'll at least go and have that conversation. Mm-hmm. And that has value, I think, to a lot of voters, particularly these fence sitters who are not political. They're very apolitical. They're not tapped in. They're not sitting around scrolling, political content all day. Their idea of politics is like maybe turning on their local or national news in the evening for 10, 15 minutes, seeing what they see and clicking it off. So I don't know how many conversations I've had where I would tell people about things that have happened and they have no clue. And it's either because they're only watching one media, or they're not watching any. Yeah. And so I think, these middle ground voters, they didn't really feel like there was any message that was speaking to them. And I don't think that Harris necessarily did this like, I'm not Trump, but I do sometimes think it came across that way. We're not talking about the things policy-wise that we're really going to put forth. And when we do, we don't broadcast it and blast it over and over again. Like, the Republican does a really good job of, and I'm sure you've seen it, like if Trump or Elon Musk or J.D. Vance or any of one of these very far-right kind of political pundits that are very mainstream say anything, within minutes, if not hours, it has been repeated on blast to the point that it has become truth. And next thing you know, I'm scrolling TikTok and there's 5 right-wing political creators that are saying the same words verbatim. I say this all the time.
I don't know if they're all in the same Telegram group or what. They are lockstep.
They are lockstep. And they're so good at it. And I'm not like, it works. But the problem is, because they've become so well equipped to do this, and not only with like mainstream people, but also with these like randos of like just political, leaning that, I'm just nobody over here, which I'm starting to think none of them are nobody. But
yeah, all the ones that get retweeted by Elon Musk. Yeah. I'm a random Indian woman. I'm a random black man. I'm a random whatever. And I'm about to give a take that 100% aligns with every single thing Donald Trump and Elon Musk have said, including 2 conspiracies to boot. Yeah. And it's like, okay, sure.
And so, but I do think that is something that is working for them. I realized that there was actually, I learned, which I was kind of not happy about, but I learned that the Joe Rogan situation where Harris didn't get to go on Joe Rogan was a little more nefarious than we were originally like.
Probably, yeah.
Like, I think the data that came out was like, she had that whole Houston rally simply to go on his show, and then he basically kind of burned her last minute, and then come to find out he scheduled Trump the same date that she was going to be there. Like, it was a whole thing.
Like, they might have been able to do it, but that campaign would have had to bend over backwards twice to make it to Joe Rogan's show, whereas before it was presented as like, oh, they thought they were better than that or whatever.
Right.
And Joe Rogan clearly didn't want to, because he was like, they wanted me to fly out to D.C. And it's like, it's the vice president. What the fuck? What do you mean? You wouldn't fly out to have this interview? Like, I know you're Joe Rogan, but like, really? The potential next person in the United States, you wouldn't want them on your show? Just clearly, they just didn't have the interest for it,
So I do think that there's this element of like, we're not getting in the spaces that we need to be getting. I also think that there's this element of like cookie cutter messaging. A great example, in 2023, Youngkin, our governor, basically paid a 6-figure ad to say, I want to put a 15-week abortion ban on the books. Like, he's
15-week abortion ban?
Yes.
Okay.
He didn't call it an abortion ban, called it a 15-week like minimum standard. He used like the, the nice, pretty, pearly words that people don't hate. Mm-hmm. But he's basically saying, like, this is what I'm on board with. This is what I'm going to advocate for. This is what I'm going to get my Republican legislators to vote for if we win the House and the Senate. And so I'm sitting here going, oh, my God, you're messaging. You guys, get on it. Like, you could be talking about how dangerous 15-week abortion bans are. Like, let's do this. And that's what I was doing on my own, like, small but, limited reach. No, they paid equally 6 figures on ads for all of their individual candidates that were in very competitive seats to say, he won't stop there. And they, like, did the same thing that Republicans do, And by the viewpoint of a middle ground voter, they othered them. They said, well, no, he didn't say he was going to do more than that. He didn't say he was going to do 6 weeks. He didn't say he was going to do a total abortion ban. So when we're taking the actual messaging that is given to us, like on a silver platter, and trying to pull the same bullshit that the other side does, where we kind of make it even more extreme, we lose those middle ground voters, because now they don't trust us either. Mm-hmm. And I think there's an element that continuously happens where, and I get you, like you talk to like extreme people a lot, and I know that that's hard to like reel that back in, and the fact that trying to be just like, are you crazy? Like, what are you talking about? But most voters that I talk to, they are not radicalized. People that vote for Trump, not radicalized. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we have to realize that the loudest voices in the room are not actually representative of the voices that are going to the polls.
Yeah. One thing I try to make my audience realize is that like, even like if I had to guess, like actual crazy radicalized MAGA is at the most would be like 20-25%.
I agree.
But even if that number was 80%, you only have to take away like 2 to 4% of voters to make a party basically like non-viable.
Right.
You don't have to convert half of them. You need like low single, like less than 5%, and the party can't win in any state.
Exactly.
And almost, yeah. So, yeah, I do agree. It's funny, and I know that we make everything about ourselves as people. So I don't know if I'm doing it too much, but one thing I see in a lot of parallels between like the world that I inhabit and then the political world is I feel like that political world is becoming more and more similar to mine. And one of the biggest advantages you have in my world that I have, for instance, because I'm a YouTuber and I'm a streamer, is doing content continuously helps because it always keeps you in front of the people's eyes, right? They never stop and think, when was the last video? What's coming out next? I forgot about this guy. Like, they know about you because you're streaming every single day. And I feel like the best thing that Trump does, as deranged and unhinged as he is the constant media occupation.
Relevancy.
Right? Yeah, the truthing and the tweeting and the crazy statements or whatever. It's just, he stays very, very relevant and very fresh and very much at the forefront of everybody's mind constantly. And that attention economy getting, I think, is something that Democrats also need to work on too.
Yeah. I mean, and we have some, but it's literally like the handful of black women that are like so outspoken, like Jasmine Crockett and AOC. And like, I mean, and I think that they do an incredible job. And ironically, I look at my state government, and in our state house, some of the most outspoken, most bold, most like stand up and do business, shit is some of our black women that are in the, Democratic caucus. And it's just funny because I feel like they're trying so hard to be present and relevant and loud, but they're just getting drowned out by all the other bullshit noise. And I agree. Like, I think this needs to be a full on, like, every Democrat needs to get on board. And the sad thing is you see these handfuls that'll be like, oh, look at me. Like, you got Senator Murphy, or you got, AOC, or you got Bernie Sanders. And like every once in a while they'll do these things, but they're the only ones. I mean, there's 215 of you right now. Like, why don't we see a mass push from all of you being really vocal, really ever present, pushing back against what's happening? Meanwhile, Republicans are like hiding from fucking town halls, So it's there's definitely a disconnect on like you said, like constantly being relevant. If you're always talking to the masses, they're not going to stop thinking about you.
For sure. Anything else?
I don't know. Elon Musk is a nightmare, but we don't want to talk about him, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
I know that right now we're encroaching on like 400, last I heard, there was 400 roughly unemployment claims from our federal workers in the state of Virginia, which we are like one of the biggest housers of federal agents. So it'll be curious to see, we have that. And then I guess we have one of the lowest unemployment rates too. So like we don't have employment really available in the private sector for these people. And yet we have a governor that's like, we'll take care of you, and talking about aid packages and all this crazy shit. And I'm like, where are we getting that money from? So, I guess I think Virginia's going to be the one to watch. I think I've watched Leader John Scott, who is the Speaker of the House, and multiple congressmen and women from my state, very like online lately, like mainstream, like MSNBC and CNN, doing a lot of big interviews, although a lot of people aren't watching that shit right now. Yeah. But I mean, I have seen them kind of making the media rounds, because I think there's this attention, like we're the bellwether state. I think what happens this November is going to kind of set a tone for the midterms, New Jersey as well, kind of what's going to come in the forecast if we still have elections. I guess. So it'll be interesting.
Do you think, I already asked you about the doomerism, and you encourage people to participate at the local level, which they should.
build coalitions. Like I've been doing that too. Like a lot of little different organizations really popped up last year, I noticed. So one of the communities I'm in is like colonial heritage. It's like very, very, you have to be 50 and up. And it's Democrat, like 40%, 60% Republican. It's more Republican leaning community. However, when I was knocking doors, every door I'd knocked on a Democrat, they'd be like, I'm the only one here. I'm like, no, you're not. Like there's that guy over there. Like, so there's this disconnect of not, like Democrats aren't very vocal publicly. So there was this issue with like not knowing who your allies were within the community. So two of the leaders in there that were already a part of our local party, the Historic Triangle Dems, which is one of the second largest in the state, they actually said, hey, let's start one for our community. Like, let's meet regularly. So now they have like over 200 and some members. They got this massive newsletter. They have a monthly meeting that's got 70 plus people in the room every month. So it's like, I see that happening. And I think that if that momentum continues, I see people, getting better about, just trying to have conversations. I think that disconnect has been gone. Like technology has really forced us to not really have real conversations anymore. And I'm always advising people, if you know somebody in your life that may or may not share your political values, but you're able to talk to them just normally, like an everyday conversation about the kids at PTA, whatever, like find something relevant that has a political attachment, discuss it, and find if there's some that you meet, in the middle on something, and then make it political and kind of invite that conversation in a different way.
Because conservatives definitely do. So
but that's the thing. Like that's a great tactic, though. Like I have. And again, I used to be a conservative. So there's an element there for me, and I think for you too, that when you've kind of lived in that world, the conversations, a lot of the talking points, it's really easy to kind of be a little more nuanced and address them before they even acknowledge what they're about to say. Like you're almost predictive on like what the conversation is going to look like when you're talking to somebody who, is a little old school conservative, more of like that, log cabin, whatever. Not these like extremists. Like there is a level where I tell people like, you're going to know right away that this conversation is dead in the water and it's not worth your time, energy, or breath. But I feel like there's a lot of people that if you can make it personal, because the reality is most people have their political ideology based on their personal experience. If you can make it personal, you can move people either way, honestly.
Yeah. All right. I agree. If people are trying to find you, where should they look you up at? Or if they want to support you, what should they find?
So Jess Anderson for Virginia, pretty much everywhere, the number 4. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram Reels. I'm on Threads and Blue Sky. I love Twitter. I still have a burner account there because I need to know what's going on. But I don't post it. So. Nothing good ever. No. I know it's a hellscape. I also have a YouTube. I'm really bad about posting. I'm trying to be better. And then I have a website which has my ActBlue and all my donation links and everything there.
Cool. Yeah. Have you? I saw on your. I think there's a thing you can fill out on Ballotpedia or Ballotpedia. You said you'd gotten into running, and you mentioned it earlier. Just curious, are you trying to like run a marathon or half marathon or anything? Or do you just like run?
I've ran 5 marathons. I ran a 24-hour run every year.
Oh my God. Okay.
I run.
Okay.
Yes, I run a lot.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Well, hey, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you sitting down and chatting, and good luck in your race. We'll keep an eye out on you.
Okay. Thank you.